The Council of Galactic Powers sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the screens before them. For eons, they had observed countless species, each more fascinating than the last. Yet, today, something was different. The broadcast they were receiving was not from a distant planet in some unknown galaxy. It was coming from Earth, the home of humanity. The Council had watched humans for years, fascinated by their progress, their struggles, and the strange balance they maintained between their darker impulses and their moments of kindness. But now, something was changing. The broadcast began with a simple message, one that echoed through the vast chambers of the Council's hall. It was an invitation, one unlike any other they had received before. The message said that today, humanity would make a choice, one that would alter their entire existence. The Council leaned forward, intrigued. What could this mean? What decision was Earth about to make that would interest the galaxy's most powerful beings? The invitation hinted at something far more profound than anything they had ever imagined. As the Council watched, the feed shifted to Earth, showing scenes of peaceful streets, busy cities, and bustling markets. People went about their daily lives, seemingly unaware of the immense significance of the moment. The humans appeared calm, polite, as always, smiling at one another, greeting each other with pleasantries, holding doors open, and offering help to strangers. This was the polite mode the message referred to. The Council knew of it well. Humanity had developed a unique system, one that kept their aggressive tendencies in check. It was a system of politeness and civility, designed to prevent the chaos that had once defined their history. But the Council also knew there was more to it. Beneath the surface, humanity's true nature simmered, a quiet undercurrent of emotion and desire that they had learned to suppress for the sake of peace. Now, humanity's leaders had decided to make a choice, to turn off the polite mode. The feed showed a room filled with human leaders, gathered in a grand hall. Their faces were serious, their eyes focused, as if they understood the gravity of the decision they were about to make. One by one, they spoke. There was no anger in their voices, but the tension in the air was palpable. The Council could feel it. This was not an ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. The Council exchanged glances, their minds racing. What would happen if humanity turned off this system that had kept them in check for so long? Would they descend into chaos, unleashing the violence and anger that had once plagued their world? Or would they rise above it, using their newfound freedom to reach greater heights? The Council's greatest fear was that humanity would lose control. They had seen it before with other species. When a society lost its inhibitions, its raw emotions took over, leading to destruction. Yet, there was a part of the Council that wondered, just wondered, if humans could be different. The feed cut to a different angle, showing a close-up of a young human woman standing at a podium. She was the leader of the human world, the one tasked with guiding them through this monumental change. Her name was Ilara, and her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the weight of the decision she was about to announce. She spoke softly, but every word was filled with conviction. "We have been polite for so long," she began, her voice carrying across the globe. "But politeness has a cost. It has cost us our true selves. We have lived in a world where we suppress our feelings, our desires, our fears, all for the sake of peace. But how much longer can we pretend? How long can we hide who we really are?" The Council watched spellbound. Her words resonated in a way they hadn't expected. The humans had always been known for their ability to adapt, to evolve, but this was something new. Ilara was speaking not just to the leaders of the world, but to the very heart of humanity. It was a plea for freedom, a call to let go of the chains that bound them to a facade of civility. "We are not perfect," she continued. "We are flawed, we are imperfect, and yes, we are sometimes cruel. But we are also capable of great things. We are capable of love, of kindness, of creation. And if we are to become who we truly are, we must stop pretending. We must turn off the polite mode." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ilara paused, allowing the weight of her statement to sink in. The council was silent, unsure of how to react. They had known that humanity had been evolving, that they had been growing into something more than just a species of survival and conformity. But this was something else. It was as if humanity was about to take a step into the unknown, a step that could either lead to their destruction or their ultimate rise. The broadcast continued as Ilara signaled for a device to be brought to her. She placed it on the table in front of her, her hands steady as she reached for the switch. A moment of silence passed, and then, with a simple flick of a button, the polite mode was turned off. The change was immediate. The human leaders' faces shifted, their expressions no longer hidden behind the mask of politeness. It was as if a dam had burst, and for the first time, the council saw the raw emotion in their eyes: fear, excitement, uncertainty, but also a strange sense of freedom. They were no longer controlled. They were no longer restrained. Humanity had just set its course into uncharted territory. The council was left in stunned silence. What would happen next? Would humanity destroy itself, or would it prove that it could rise above its darkest impulses? The answer was still unknown. The galaxy held its breath, and the council watched, uncertain of what they were about to witness, but certain that this moment would be one that changed everything forever. The broadcast continued, and the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. On Earth, people moved about their daily lives, unaware of the momentous event that had just occurred. The switch had been flipped. The polite mode was no longer active. The world was about to change. As the days passed, it became clear that the decision humanity had made was not one taken lightly. Leaders who had once projected an image of calm control now appeared more open, more raw. The politeness that had defined their interactions was gone, and in its place, there was something new, something unsettling, yet oddly captivating. Across cities, in the markets, on the streets, humans began to interact differently. Gone were the cautious smiles and careful words. People were speaking their minds without hesitation, no longer afraid of offending anyone. In some places, this newfound freedom led to heated arguments and passionate debates. People were angry about the systems that had held them back for so long. There were confrontations in the streets as individuals expressed frustrations that had been buried under layers of polite restraint for decades, maybe even centuries. In other places, however, there was a sense of liberation. People laughed freely, embraced each other more openly, and acted in ways that were previously unimaginable. The tension that had once gripped them, the pressure to be perfect and polite, seemed to have lifted. But beneath the surface, something darker began to emerge. As humans revealed their true emotions, they found that the floodgates had opened in ways they didn't fully understand. Some, especially those in power, realized they had been keeping secrets. Politicians and leaders who once spoke of unity and peace now found themselves at odds with the very system they had helped create. The walls they had built, both figurative and literal, began to crumble as their true selves came to the forefront. In the political halls, where previously leaders had spoken in carefully constructed sentences, now they argued openly. Their voices were raised, their words unfiltered, and their actions increasingly unpredictable. But it wasn't just the leaders. Ordinary people began to feel the effects too. The restraint that had kept them in check, kept them from revealing their darkest feelings, was gone. Some people screamed at each other in frustration, others in joy, but none of it was polite. It was human, raw, and wild. The Council of Galactic Powers watched all of this unfold with growing concern. The humans, they realized, were no longer playing by the same rules. And what made them even more intrigued and fearful was that they weren't sure what would happen next. The Council had seen other species in similar situations, but none like humanity. They had evolved quickly, overcoming their violent past to create a world of peace. But now, with the restraints gone, could they maintain that peace, or would it all fall apart? And then, on a global stage, came the announcement that shook the galaxy. Humanity, it seemed, had not only turned off the polite mode, they had started to embrace what they called their true mode. This wasn't just a shift in manners or behavior. It was a shift in everything. It was a call to reject the old ways of control, to reject the masks they wore, and to become something more honest, more authentic, even if that meant embracing the darker parts of themselves. Ilara, the human leader who had sparked this revolution, stood before the cameras once again. But this time, her tone was different. Gone was the calm, measured voice that had led the world through peace. Now, there was an edge to her words, a determination, but also an awareness of the dangerous path they were on. "We have made our choice," she declared, her voice strong, resonating across the planet. "We have decided to be true to ourselves, no matter the cost. We may stumble, we may fall, but we will no longer hide behind politeness. We are human, imperfect, flawed, but real. And that is the only way forward." Her declaration sent shockwaves through Earth, and the Council watched, unsure of how to react. The emotions of humanity were unpredictable, and even the most advanced galactic minds could not predict what would happen next. What they knew, however, was this: humanity had just opened a door that could never be closed. A door to a future where their emotions would no longer be controlled. A door that could lead to great things, or to utter chaos. And as the Council prepared to witness the aftermath of this decision, one thing was clear. Humanity had just entered a new era. One that would either make them a force to be reckoned with, or lead them to their own destruction. The question now was, would the galaxy be ready for what came next? The aftermath of humanity's decision to turn off the polite mode was far from predictable. In the days following the global announcement, the world seemed to be teetering on the edge of something huge. At first, it was chaos. People had been so accustomed to suppressing their true emotions for the sake of peace that the sudden flood of raw feelings was overwhelming. Streets that were once calm became battlegrounds of words, as anger, frustration, and pent-up desires spilled out into the open. In cities around the world, public spaces erupted into heated debates. Small disagreements quickly escalated into shouting matches as people felt the freedom to speak their minds, no matter how harsh their words were. Political rallies turned into shouting contests, with leaders of various nations clashing in public forums. Protests flared up in some regions, with citizens demanding new systems of governance. The anger that had been quietly smoldering for years now had an outlet, and there was no turning back. But it wasn't just anger that was unleashed. In other places, the newly liberated humans embraced their newfound freedom with a sense of joy and creativity. Without the constant pressure to conform, they found themselves expressing their thoughts and feelings more openly. Artists painted murals that expressed the raw emotions they had kept hidden for so long. Musicians created songs that spoke to their true selves, filled with energy and passion. Everywhere, humanity seemed to be searching for something deeper, something more genuine. The sudden burst of creativity felt like a breath of fresh air. People felt more alive than they had in a long time. The Council, watching all of this unfold, was baffled. This was unlike anything they had seen before. They had assumed that removing the polite mode would lead to widespread conflict and violence, that humanity would tear itself apart. But there was something more here, something unexpected. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of hope, of energy. Humanity was not just reacting, it was evolving. In the political arenas, leaders who had once been smooth talkers, skilled in the art of diplomacy, now found themselves struggling to control their emotions. The usual calm and careful decisions were replaced with impulsive, raw reactions. Some leaders were quick to embrace the change, seeing it as an opportunity to connect with their people on a deeper level. Others, however, were lost. Their carefully curated masks had been torn away, and they struggled to adjust to the newfound unpredictability of their world. But perhaps the most surprising of all was the response of the people themselves. They were divided. Some welcomed the change with open arms, feeling a sense of liberation as they cast off the politeness that had always kept them in check. Others, though, struggled with the intensity of it all. They longed for the stability and order that had once come with the polite restraint they had known. They missed the civility, the calm that had defined their interactions for so long. Now, everything seemed too raw, too exposed. Even as some citizens thrived in the newfound freedom, others retreated into themselves, feeling overwhelmed by the constant barrage of unfiltered emotions. Some went into hiding, choosing to live in quieter, more controlled spaces where they could regain a sense of peace. It became clear that the decision to turn off the polite mode had created a divide between those who embraced the change and those who feared it. The council watched with great interest as the human response continued to unfold. The galaxy had long seen humanity as a species full of potential, but now they were witnessing a side of them that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could humanity survive in this new state of emotional freedom, or would they collapse under the weight of their own unleashed emotions? The council had their doubts. But there was one thing that became abundantly clear to the council as they continued to monitor Earth. Humanity was not backing down. Despite the turmoil, despite the confusion, the humans were not going to return to the way things had been. They had chosen their path, and they would follow it, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Ilara, the leader who had sparked the change, watched with mixed emotions. She had known that removing the polite mode would come with consequences, but even she had not anticipated how overwhelming the response would be. The world she had once known was unraveling before her eyes, and while part of her felt exhilarated by the chaos and the possibilities it represented, another part of her wondered if they had gone too far. Could humanity truly handle this newfound freedom? Would they become stronger for it, or would they be torn apart by the very emotions they had once suppressed? These questions lingered in Ilara's mind as she took a step back and watched the world she had helped to create. A world that was at once both more vibrant and more volatile than she had ever imagined. And so the council continued to watch, unsure of what to make of the spectacle unfolding on Earth. They knew that the humans had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and they had no idea where this journey would lead. Would humanity rise above its flaws and find new strength in its emotional freedom? Or would they spiral into self-destruction, unable to control the storm of emotions they had unleashed? Only time would tell. The council could only watch and wait as humanity, now unshackled and unpolished, ventured into the unknown. As the days turned into weeks, the aftermath of humanity's decision to turn off their polite mode began to take shape in ways that no one, not even the council, had fully anticipated. What was initially seen as an outbreak of chaos gradually revealed itself as a complicated, unpredictable evolution. Humanity had entered a new phase, one that was as terrifying as it was thrilling. On Earth, cities that had once been calm, orderly, and safe now felt like battlegrounds. The raw emotions that had been unleashed seemed to be spiraling out of control. Protests erupted in nearly every major city. But they were not the peaceful protests that had once been the hallmark of the polite mode era. Now, they were heated and volatile. People no longer hesitated to express their anger, and it spilled over into the streets. The usual polite requests for change became loud demands, and at times, these demands turned into full-blown clashes between groups with differing visions of what the world should look like. Some wanted to restore the old systems of politeness and restraint, fearing the emotional outbursts were tearing society apart. Others, however, welcomed the change, believing it was the start of a new era, a more honest, free one. The government struggled to maintain control. Leaders who had been used to keeping their emotions hidden behind political facades now found themselves navigating a world where their own feelings were no longer under control. They were overwhelmed, not just by the emotions of their people, but by their own. Some leaders grew defensive, clinging to their old methods of diplomacy, while others gave in to the new wave of openness. In some places, political structures collapsed under the weight of the emotional upheaval. Governments disbanded, and new factions emerged, each with their own vision for humanity's future. The divide between those who embraced the freedom of emotional release and those who sought to return to the more controlled, polite society deepened. Some people found liberation in their emotions. They found a new sense of connection with others, forming communities based on shared passions and experiences. There was a rise in artistic expression. Music, literature, and visual art exploded with raw, unfiltered emotion. It was a time of creative outpouring, and the world seemed alive with possibility. People were no longer afraid to be themselves, to express their deepest fears and desires. In many ways, it was the most human the world had ever been. But not everyone found peace in this new reality. For many, the lack of restraint was suffocating. They had lived their entire lives under the pressure of politeness and had come to rely on it to maintain order in their relationships and their work. With the removal of that safety net, many felt lost, uncertain of how to navigate the world without the constant self-monitoring they had grown so accustomed to. Some retreated from the chaos, isolating themselves in quieter places where the emotional storms of the world could not reach them. Others began to regret the decision, wishing for a return to the calm and predictability that had once existed. But the world was not about to return to its former state. No, humanity had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Even as some clung to the past, the overwhelming majority of humans had embraced this raw, emotional freedom. And with it came the realization that the future would never be the same. The Council, still watching from the far reaches of space, began to understand that humanity was not just a species to be studied. They were a force to be reckoned with. The very essence of what it meant to be human had changed, and the galaxy would need to come to terms with this new, unpredictable reality. Ilara, the leader who had initiated this bold move, now stood at the center of it all. She had known there would be consequences, but even she had not anticipated how deeply the shift would affect the planet. In the beginning, she had believed that humanity was ready for this change, that they would rise to the challenge of embracing their true selves. But as she watched the chaos unfold, as she saw the uncertainty in the eyes of the people she had led, she began to wonder if they were truly ready after all. There were moments of doubt, moments when Ilara questioned if this was the right path. Was the liberation of humanity worth the cost of the disarray it had caused? Could they rebuild, or had they destroyed something irreplaceable? As leader, she felt a responsibility to guide her people through this transformation, but she also knew that there was no going back. Humanity had chosen this path, and there was no turning back now. In the midst of this uncertainty, the Council watched closely, weighing their options. They had seen the raw power of humanity's emotions, and while they had once feared that this uncontrolled energy would lead to humanity's destruction, they were now beginning to see the potential for something far greater. There was a strength in these emotions, a force that could shape the future of not just Earth, but the galaxy. The question remained, would humanity rise to the challenge of their new, unfiltered world, or would they fall into destruction, torn apart by the very emotions they had unleashed? As Ilara gazed at the chaos unfolding around her, she realized that the future of humanity was no longer in her hands alone. The world was in the grip of something far more powerful than anyone could control. The story of humanity had only just begun, and no one, least of all the Council, could predict how it would end. The world had changed irrevocably. In the weeks following humanity's decision to turn off their polite mode, the planet seemed to be in the midst of an emotional explosion. The rawness of human feelings was no longer suppressed, and the result was a world divided. Some were embracing the newfound freedom, while others struggled to cope with the chaos it created. For the first time in recorded history, the world was living without filters, and the consequences were as profound as they were unpredictable. As the political unrest grew, so too did the rise of new leaders, people who were unafraid to speak their truth, who thrived in this new world of emotional openness. Some of these leaders were charismatic, their passion drawing followers like moths to a flame. They promised a new world, one where people no longer had to hide their true selves, where the old structures of politeness and restraint were discarded in favor of pure expression. They advocated for a society where honesty and authenticity were paramount, even if it meant facing the uncomfortable, messy truths that came with such freedom. But not all leaders were as hopeful. Many clung to the old ways, to the calm and order that had kept the world stable for so long. They feared that humanity was spiraling into chaos, that the freedom to express unfiltered emotion would lead to destruction. In the political arenas, these leaders began to wage a quiet war against the new movement, attempting to re-establish control, to bring back the civility that had once defined human interactions. Their struggle was not just political, it was emotional. They were fighting against the very essence of what humanity had become. And yet, the harder they fought to restore the old ways, the more people rejected them, no longer willing to go back to a time of restraint and suppression. The divide between these two factions, those embracing emotional freedom and those seeking to restore politeness, was growing wider by the day. Protests became more frequent, sometimes turning violent. In some parts of the world, people formed groups that sought to re-establish the societal rules of politeness, while in others, people rioted in the streets, demanding the right to live without shame, without the constraints of a society built on politeness and conformity. But perhaps the most startling change was in the way humanity began to relate to each other on a more personal level. In the past, human relationships were often guided by polite conventions, manners, expectations, the unspoken rules of decorum that kept things harmonious. Now, with those rules stripped away, people began to form relationships based on something far deeper. They no longer feared conflict or confrontation. In fact, many began to thrive on it. Arguments, once seen as a sign of failure or breakdown, were now viewed as a necessary part of true connection. People screamed at each other, they laughed, they cried, but all of it felt real. For the first time, people began to see one another as they truly were, with all their imperfections, flaws, and passions on full display. It wasn't all easy. The rawness of human emotion took its toll. People found themselves confronting parts of themselves they had long buried. The flood of emotions was overwhelming for some, while others reveled in the honesty of it all. But as the weeks turned into months, a strange thing happened. As the initial shock of the new world began to settle, people started to adapt. They learned how to handle the unfiltered emotions they were experiencing, how to express themselves without fear. The world was becoming something new, something unknown, and yet, in its own way, it was becoming stronger for it. Ilara, who had started the movement that led humanity down this path, watched with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had believed in this vision of a freer, more authentic world, and yet, even she could not deny the chaos that had followed. There were moments when she wondered if they had made a mistake, if the world had become too unmanageable, too raw. But then she would see the sparks of connection between people, the new relationships being formed, the music and art that was blooming like flowers in the desert, and she knew that there was no turning back. The decision was irreversible. Humanity had chosen to step into the unknown, to break free from the polite, restrained society they had known. And while the path ahead was uncertain, it was clear that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. They had unlocked something within themselves that had long been suppressed, their true, unfiltered nature. The future of humanity was no longer just in their hands. It was in their hearts, their emotions, and their willingness to face the chaos of their own existence head-on. From the Council's perspective, it was becoming evident that humanity was far from the fragile species they had once thought them to be. They had chosen a path that defied the expectations of even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Whether that path would lead to their ascension or their downfall was still unknown, but one thing was certain: humanity was no longer the same. The galaxy watched with bated breath, unsure of what the future would hold, but undeniably aware that the species on Earth had just set themselves on a journey that would forever change the course of history. The Council of Galactic Powers could no longer simply observe humanity from a distance. They now had to reckon with what humanity had become, and with the reality that, for better or worse, Earth had become a place unlike any other in the galaxy. And so the question remained: would humanity rise to become a beacon of hope and progress, or would they spiral into chaos, their emotions pulling them apart? No one knew, not even the humans themselves. But the world was watching, and for the first time in history, humanity had no choice but to write its own future.